Here we go.
Welcome to another edition of Drugs, Crime, and Politics, brought to you by the Drug Policy Forum of Texas. Good evening. I'm your host, Buford Terrell. With me, my colleague, Clay Jones.
Good evening.
And I think tonight we've got a lot of election results to talk about, among other things.
I almost dream about how good these could have come out.
Well, there were 5 marijuana-related issues on state budgets across the country Tuesday. Right. And I guess to start with the bad news, in Montana, they were not able to overturn the state statutes that had pretty well crippled the Citizens Initiative for medical marijuana. It's a fight that's been brewing within the legislature there for some time now. One that I'm not sure whether the glass is half full or half empty when we look at Arkansas.
Well, you know, I was really encouraged. There was predictions that the bill was not going to do very well, and it only lost by 1%.
Yeah, Arkansas defeated an initiative on medical marijuana. 51% no, 49% for. And frankly, my own feeling before the election was that looking at Arkansas both geographically and socially, that it would probably go down by at least 5 points or maybe more than that. So for it to be a first-time attempt, one that actually got onto the ballot rather late in the game, and one that didn't particularly get a lot of play even within Arkansas, it came surprisingly close.
It was, to me, it was very similar to Prop 19. I mean, Prop 19 just missed 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And this one, they didn't give it a lot of chance.
Yeah.
And it just missed.
Yeah.
There's got to be a lot more support out there, and I'll bet you in 2 years when it comes back up again, that it will pass.
Probably so. But as I say, the main thing that surprised me was the size of the yes vote in Arkansas. That was considerably more than I had expected to see.
For a southern state, I think they did wonderful.
Yeah. Maybe there's something to a state that bred up Bill Clinton. I don't know.
He didn't inhale, though.
Well, yeah, but if you remember, he said it wasn't that he didn't try to inhale, but that he had asthma and his lungs closed up and he couldn't inhale.
A likely story.
But then we look at Massachusetts, and
wow.
Massachusetts, I expect we're going to see some surprising things out of in the next year or so, but their medical marijuana proposition passed with surprising ease. I mean, it really wasn't in doubt from the word go, though.
But what's surprising there now is medical just passed a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
They've already introduced a bill for legalization.
Well, in at least 2 of the counties, they had legalization propositions on the ballot, and these were both urban Boston area counties, but it passed there. But it was, 2 years ago or so that Massachusetts passed a decriminalization referendum that is probably the most liberal one in the country. So that's a state that I expect to see a whole lot more action in the very near future.
New England is just a hotbed. You've got Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Vermont, and Maine. All have filed bills already for legalization.
Yeah, and New England is practically all medical marijuana now as well.
New Hampshire is the only holdout, I believe.
And now we get to the big 3 in the election. And these were the 3 states that had legalization referenda: Oregon, Washington, and Colorado.
Mm-hmm.
And of those, Washington and Colorado both voted to legalize possession of up to an ounce of marijuana by adults within the state.
Right.
In Colorado, it was actually a state constitutional amendment.
Colorado does it by January 5th, and Washington State, theirs goes in December 6th.
Yeah. Now, Oregon failed to pass their referendum.
I think that was because there was too much infighting up there.
There never was any unity of the different groups
No.
favoring legalization, but they had very, very strong disagreements about how to do it, and they never came together with a single proposition that they could support.
And they're driving under the influence.
Yeah.
It was a ridiculous amount.
Wow.
5 nanograms.
Yeah, now, I believe Washington also has a 5 nanograms.
Because I've been watched some tests done, and people still are up to 20 after not smoking for.
What no one talks about on this is that the reason why 5 nanograms per deciliter in the blood has been selected by several of the states is that because with the current state of blood testing, that's the smallest amount that can be detected at all. So a 5 nanogram test for DUI is actually an absolute, any detectable presence at all is presumptive of impairment. It's not like blood alcohol testing where there's a rather wide threshold between no drinks at all and enough to be impaired. With a 5 nanogram limit, if they detect any presence at all, it's at least 5 nanograms, so it becomes an absolute liability kind of law.
But people are testing 20 hours after they've smoked, and they're still way above that.
Yeah, and there has been all of the laboratory and experimental evidence I have seen, and there's been a lot of it to date, suggests that there is little or no driving impairment with marijuana anyway.
There isn't.
Yeah. The big difference between alcohol and marijuana is that when someone gets drunk, they think they're sober, they think they can still do anything they could do or even more, and they act recklessly. Marijuana does not impair judgment or thinking, so that people who have been smoking marijuana or eating marijuana cookies or whatever may know that their reflexes and bodily function has been slowed down, but they're aware of it enough so that they compensate by driving more slowly and by driving more carefully. Yeah.
Use your direction lights, stop at stop signs.
And the interesting thing is that in the states like California, where medical marijuana use has become substantial, the number of driving while impaired accidents has dropped by around 8%.
Right.
So, but I think we need to look at what the 2 states legalizing is going to mean. And I think it has to be looked like in 4 different areas. The first is what it means to the people in those states. The second is what, if anything, is going to be the federal government's response to it. The third is what's going to be the effect in other states. And the fourth is what's going to happen in Mexico. And I want everyone to realize that this is not just a chat between me and Clay. We want you to get into the conversation too. You can call us at the number on the screen and you'll be on the show with us. If you're watching this on the internet or indirectly in some other way, you can email me at the email address shown on the screen. We'll get back to you really quickly, and we may use your question or comment on the next show. So please, if you want to get into this discussion, please do give us a call or drop us an email.
I think that the international ramifications go a lot further
Well,
than just
let's
Mexico.
let's start with the local.
Okay.
What's going to happen in Washington and Colorado?
Well, the policemen are going to feel like they've been relieved of stupid charges that they're going to have.
No, they're not. They're going to resent it and hate it because it gets rid of some of their main tools of getting the bad guys.
Probable cause.
The problem is going to be police resistance, not police encouragement.
Oh, no, they're not going to be encouraged.
Although I will admit the good thing in at least Seattle, Tacoma, and Denver, the district attorneys have already announced that even though the laws are not effective yet, they're not going to be filing any more simple marijuana possession charges. And in Seattle and Tacoma, at least, they're in the process of dismissing those that are currently pending. Now, whether or not they have to do that's a slightly different question. There's a fairly old Supreme Court case that held that it's unconstitutional to continue to punish someone for a law that has been repealed, because that would be denying him due process of law to punish him for something that's not now against the law.
So then when things change, turn around, like using Texas as an example, that apartments wouldn't be able to deny you rent?
No. This strictly applies to imposing criminal penalties.
Criminal penalties,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. So that's one thing. The police, at least in these major cities, the prosecutors have already announced that they're not going to enforce or not going to prosecute any criminal charges filed for possession, even though the law has not technically gone into effect yet. So that's going to be a major thing. Couple of other things that come into play. One of the most important, I think, is that the smell of marijuana will no longer be probable cause to conduct a search. Now, in the past, one of the largest sources of search warrants or for vehicular searches has been the policeman's claim that I smelled marijuana, and since marijuana's contraband, that gives me probable cause to search for it.
Mm-hmm.
But if marijuana's not illegal, then it's no longer contraband, and therefore it doesn't give probable cause for any kind of search. And since the human nose, at least, can't tell the difference between 1 ounce and 1 pound,
Mm-hmm.
if the cop smells marijuana, he has no reason to think that it's more than the legal amount.
We're going to have to retrain all the dogs?
This may kick dog searches out completely. One interesting thing, at least according to what some policemen have said since this election, is that their dogs are trained to detect illegal drugs in general, And the dogs cannot distinguish or do not distinguish between marijuana, cocaine, methamphetamine, and heroin.
Yep.
Which means if a dog reacts positively that he's picked up a smell, then his handler has no way of knowing whether what he has smelled is marijuana or methamphetamine. And since if it's marijuana, that doesn't establish probable cause for a search, that basically means dog sniffs no longer can support searches in those states. Now, I'm sure it's going to take some court action to work this one out all the way.
Yeah, but just like Florida, they've got dog searches into the appeals court system right now. They tested 12 dogs, and they went to a place that they felt very positive that there wasn't ever any drugs. It was a rectory for a church, and they told the dog handlers that there was drugs planted in somewhere, and they ran all 12 dogs, and all 12 dogs hit places in that church area, and there wasn't any drugs planted anywhere. Every one of those 12 dogs failed the test.
Well, the interesting thing about that test, Clayton, is that they had some small red cards that the testers put in place to show where drugs had been placed, even though there weren't any drugs there. But the idea was they could put those markers down and make sure that they got all of the drugs later to clean up. And when they analyzed the data, what they found out was that the dogs were giving a positive reaction at those places where the dog handlers could see the red cards. But going back, and this was 12 or 15 years ago, a United States District Court in Mississippi refused to allow the admission of a dog search into court because, based upon the scientific evidence introduced in that court, he found that there was no credible scientific basis that the dog's search results were accurate. There's another Supreme Court rule, the Daubert rule, that says in order for scientific opinion evidence or technical evidence to be introduced into a criminal case, there has to be sufficient groundwork evidence introduced to prove that it is scientifically correct and accurate and that it meets the test of scientific reliability. And so far, in the few cases that have come along that have really challenged it, dog searches have always failed the Daubert test. There have been several university studies that have been conducted that indicate that the dogs are horribly unreliable and are not accurate enough to be relied on. So there's a good chance that if enough cases go to court, that the appellate courts around the country are going to end up banning the use of dog searches completely.
Damn, that'll make me be able to get through West Texas without getting searched anymore. Damn, that sounds good.
You don't mean that you've been invited to join the Sierra Blanca Choir?
I've been inspected there 4 or 5 times already.
Okay.
Every time I go through.
Well, next time, do your traveling in a tour bus and they'll certainly inspect you again.
There's a better way. Just take Route 20.
But, you know, I'm also looking at something else about what's going to happen to police work in these states. And so far, the police have, in effect, quit being investigators and have quit doing their police work and instead use undercover agents and confidential informants. And their best source for both undercover operators and informants, and the technical term we all know for these people is snitches.
Mm-hmm.
Their best source for snitches is to catch someone on a minor drug offense, which can be possession of marijuana, and tell them, if you cooperate with us and make a drug buy so that we can watch it and arrest the seller, or if you tell us who you got it from, we won't file the charges against you and we'll just let you go. When you remove the offense of possession of marijuana from the things that people can be arrested for, then the police no longer have this as a lever to use to turn people into snitches. And I suspect that that's going to make a radical change in the way the police do business.
Yes, but those people aren't even safe doing it. We had a young lady, 16 years old, I think she was, in Florida
That
this
was
year.
the one that, she was coerced into serving as an undercover operative to make a buy. She was not allowed to call her parents before she agreed to it. She was not given access to a lawyer. The buy she went on turned bad, and she was shot to death in the aftermath. And it raised such a stink that Florida, in fact, passed a law
Right.
prohibiting the police from using minors as undercover operatives in any situation without parental consent. It's time for us to take a break. When we come back, we'll talk about how the feds will probably react to these things.
That you started using cannabis at one point when you were in Oregon, so that you weren't breaking the laws.
Right.
How did you find it? How did it start? Did it work on you right away? Did you have stuff that just made you so high that you didn't know what was going on? Tell us about your experience a little bit.
Well, what happened was the clinic that I went to is one of those that is licensed in Oregon. They have training classes there. They teach you about how to use it, whether it's to use a vaporizer, to smoke it, or to use it in food. There are many ways you can use it, and how to dose it so that you can titrate your dose to a low amount and not get to feeling high, just enough so that you feel some relief. And since then, I've read a lot of studies that show that if you use the minimal amount, you get the same effect as if you used a large amount, so that you really don't need to get high to get relief from it. Each individual person has their own level of tolerance for what they want to achieve, and it's pretty much personalized.
Well, you told us that you weren't interested and you had not done this before you were retired.
Right.
Undoubtedly, you have smoked it, and you probably smoked a little bit more than you probably should have for your personal effect.
Mm-hmm.
But you ended up getting high from it. What the high was it? Could you handle it? Was it throwing you way off? What was it like?
Well, I always aim for the lowest dose. I pretty much know. Personally, I use a ventilator. Stop down. You can erase that. Personally, I have found that a vaporizer, it's better for your health. You're not inhaling smoke. And I have pretty much found that if I take 2 puffs, that's all I need. If I take 3 puffs, then I can feel a little bit of a high. It's not something that's scary. It's just something that's very relaxing. I always know that I don't drive if I've been using it. I'm very careful about when I use it. I don't go out when I'm using it. I use it when I'm in my own home or when I'm staying with relatives. And it's just worked for me that way. This idea, I know I was talking to a cousin who is much younger than me and asking her about her experiences. She said that all she ever knew was she would use it years ago as almost a hallucinogen. Well, that hasn't been my experience at all. It really is just a calming medication. One of the reasons I started looking into it was because I was having such bad side effects from the medications, the pharmaceutical medications that I was using, that I just wanted to find something different that was more benign and didn't have the terrible side effects. So that was my reason for looking into it.
Now, how long have you been doing it?
Well, it depends. I think probably about five to 6 years. But like I said, I can only use it legally up there in Oregon. That's where I have my card. And my son is considered my
Caretaker?
my caretaker, and he has the authorization to, if he needs to find, to bring some to me from a grower, then I think I'm getting that mixed up, so we probably better not
No,
talk about that.
you can talk, that's in Oregon.
That's in Oregon, yeah.
Yes.
But I'm getting the caretaker and the grower are two different things you have to have, but he's both, so.
Okay, that's all right. That explains it. A caretaker is somebody who provides cannabis for other patients.
A caretaker is somebody that, if they have the documentation, they are authorized to transport the medication for you.
And
the grower is somebody who is actually growing the plant.
And have you had any problems while you were in Oregon, or did you see other people having a lot of problems?
No.
What was the police like up there? These people are taking it medically. Are the police anxious after them? Did you see much in the newspapers or hear much about it?
I haven't, but...
So it was pretty benign up there as far as the reaction to medical marijuana?
I think it is. I think the things they concentrate on are large growers that aren't certified users or certified growers, and that's what they pretty much concentrate on. I don't hang out with smokers or medicinal cannabis users there, so I really am not a part of the community.
Yes, but you would know, you listen to radio, watch TV.
Oh, yeah, sure.
There wasn't a big hullabaloo about it?
No, not at
It
all.
was very well accepted through public?
It's very much open. I mean, they have a cannabis newspaper and publication that comes out every 2 months. They have a daily cannabis radio program. It's just, I think Portland and Oregon has always been ahead of the rest of the country anyway in a lot of other things. In alternative medicine is widely followed in both Oregon and Washington. So I think both of those places seem to be much more open and accepting.
Welcome back to Drugs, Crime, and Politics. Clay, who was that delightful woman you were interviewing?
That
there?
is Jackie. Jackie's a retired nurse. She's got a few health problems, and conventional medicine wasn't working well for her, and she went on an odyssey to find out if marijuana actually worked. And she has her children live up in Oregon. She goes up there. She's been to classes. She's really learned. She is a wealth of information that I think that all of us are going to benefit from.
Okay.
She's going to try to get here on the program. Every program we're going to try to do a segment And I'm going to try to drag her in here at least once every couple of months to answer questions.
That sounds good. I look forward to hearing what she has to say. Now, we've been talking about the legalization votes in Washington and Colorado, talking mainly about what would happen locally. But I think the real question on most people's minds are what's going to be the federal reaction to it. And for a little brief introduction, under our federal system, the federal law is applicable in all 50 states and is enforced by the federal government, and it doesn't matter what the states do. Now, on criminal law, the states may, if they want to, have a law that parallels the federal government, like the law against bank robbery, but they don't have to. They can simply sit out and let the feds enforce their own law. On the other hand, a state cannot do anything that makes the state itself violate the federal law or that makes the federal law harder to enforce. So this means that in these two states, possession of marijuana is no longer against the state law, and the state police will not arrest people for possessing up to an ounce. But it's still in violation of the federal law, and the feds can come in and enforce the law themselves. But before we get to what all of this means, our friend Dean Becker is on the phone.
Yep.
Hello, Dean. Welcome to Drugs, Crime, and Politics.
Buford, thank you, sir. I'm glad to be with you. Yeah, it's been a busy month since we were last speaking on air, right?
Yes, it has, and we've been talking election results tonight.
Well, I wasn't surprised, really, considering the amount of work that the good people like Mason Tvert and in Colorado, Allison Holcomb did in Washington.
Yeah.
And I'm really proud of the fact that my band of brothers in law enforcement against prohibition, I think, had a substantial role to play in making this change happen.
Yeah. We've both been discussing that we were pleasantly surprised by how narrowly medical marijuana lost in Arkansas.
Well, yes, indeed, and that's the thing, that if in Arkansas, what is 46-54, was it?
I think it was 51-49, 51-48 maybe.
I didn't hear the final number.
Yeah, it was
even
right
to be 40-something to 50-something is amazing.
Yeah.
And it shows that even in Arkansas, lots of people understand this need for change.
Yeah. So, what else has been going on?
Well, I was supposed to have gone to the conference up in Portland, Oregon, the Harm Reduction Coalition.
Yes.
And due to my advancing age, I experienced something, gout. Never had it before. I was paralyzed almost.
I had it when I was a much younger man, and that means you and I joined not only a whole lot of royalty, but it was also one of Benjamin Franklin's primary complaints.
Well, I had never, not in many years, experienced a pain, anything like that.
Yeah.
But and it prevented me from going to Portland. But luckily, I did have Doug McVeigh, who works for Common Sense for Drug Policy, who lives in Portland.
Yeah.
He attended it and was able to put together some fine interviews, capture some of the sessions,
Great.
and we made it our Cultural Baggage and Century of Lies show for yesterday on KPFT.
Okay.
And I'll have enough to probably do another couple of shows for next week there at 90.1 FM. And it's kind of heartening, again, this great news about marijuana being recognized and appreciated truly by the vote. And to hear these stories from the drug users up there in Portland, how they are, and I'm talking about heroin users and cocaine users, and how they are now becoming allies with police and health officials trying to protect the health of their community, how they're not being vilified as they were, They're not being, denigrated as less than human.
Yeah.
Their opinions matter. And I think that's another good sign that, cities like Portland and Seattle and even Chicago and New York are beginning to recognize this.
Well, it's kind of amazing to me across the country, in spite of all of the heated drug war rhetoric out of Washington, how many cities across the country have moved over into a harm reduction, medically centered approach to addiction and overuse issues.
Well, and then we have Houston, and we have the signs of recognizing this need for change here.
Yeah.
We recognize that our urine testing lab was a failure, that our drug testing lab was a failure, that our parole and probation department have been less than perfect, that we have police that are corrupt, that we have situations that demand that we reanalyze what's going on, that we do something about it. We even have a few Texas politicians that talk about it. But in Houston, well, maybe behind closed doors.
Yeah.
But we do have some signs that perhaps the changes that are sweeping most of America, and including Arkansas, could and perhaps should happen here.
Well, it may just be wishful thinking on my part, but I seem to have detected a significant thawing in the editorial position of the Houston Chronicle lately.
Yes.
Well, yes. And they had been on a rather good change, of course, towards logic and common sense. But I think when they had the new editor come from the San Francisco Chronicle, I think he just arrived a month or two ago, perhaps that had something to do with that swing, that change of attitude.
That may be. So, and once again, we can catch you on Sundays at 90.1 at what time?
6:30 to 7:30 p.m.
Okay.
And as I said, we'll have plenty from the Harm Reduction Conference. We had a tribute to that young kid. You guys probably know about him, the young Cash Hyde.
Yes.
And he passed, I think, Tuesday, Wednesday of last week.
Yeah.
We had a segment of his father talking about Cash, and he was America's youngest cannabis user.
Right.
Now, how old was he when he passed?
He was 4.
4.
He was 4.
And that's about 3.5 years longer than they had given him?
Yeah, right. They had years ago told the parents to go home and
Watch him die.
well, make plans.
Yeah.
But it's who knows? There was a point there, 75 days, I think it was, where the state of Montana shut down or was shutting down all the dispensaries. People were hiding. The cannabis was not available. They weren't able to continue the full therapy with young Cash Hyde, and don't know if that made any difference. But I just know that he's shown a bright light on the thought that this cannabis medicine can be very beneficial, even for babies.
Okay. Well, I'm sure that we're going to have a lot to talk about over this next year. The ramifications of this month are really kind of mind-boggling. So.
Well, yes. You think about the resonance, the global resonance on this. It's impacted people in Moscow and Mexico and countries all around the world are determining their cohesion with the U.S. eternal drug war, and determining if the people of America don't believe in it, why should we?
Well, that's
and
right.
I think it's done a great deal to embolden people around the world to speak of this need for change.
Okay.
I mean, if you look at the bills that have gone in since the election, they're all over Central, South America, and Mexico. They are showing their displeasure with the drug war by all these bills that are just getting flooded into their legislative sessions.
Well, sure, Uruguay is leading the way, and we even have other states here in the U.S. where the legislators are putting forward bills to legalize, right there in the State House.
Yeah, there are 4 now. Well, we're glad that you could join us tonight, Dean. We'll catch you on the radio, and we'll spend this next year following the fallout from these elections. Thank you.
Indeed we will. Buford, Clay, you guys keep up the good work.
Okay.
You too, Dean.
All right.
So, there are lots of ramifications. As we were saying, a real question is going to be, what are the feds going to do about it? And
My opinion,
what do
nothing.
you guess?
Nothing.
That's about what I'm thinking too. And it's not that they don't want to do something, it's the fact that they can't
Do anything about it.
The dirty secret of the drug war since the very beginning is that the feds don't have the capability to enforce the law themselves, and they have always counted on the states and the cities to do it for them.
Yes.
And I think that maybe the best way to look at it are just some basic numbers. With about 1.5 million drug arrests of all kinds across the whole United States every year, and about 800,000 of those are for mere marijuana possession. All of the federal courts in all of the United States handle about 14,000 criminal cases a year. There are only 481 federal judges, trial judges in the United States. The Drug Enforcement Agency, the federal drug cops, have about 5,500 agents total. That's roughly the size of the Houston police force.
Mm-hmm.
There is absolutely no way that small a system can operate nationwide to make up that 800,000 marijuana possession arrests. And under the current state of affairs, there is no way they can go to Congress and ask for more men or more money. Now, they may make some noises about enforcing the law. I don't expect to hear much of that. They may do a few high-profile, big TV news raids like those they've done on a few medical marijuana dispensaries in California. But in effect, there's not really anything the feds can do about it.
No. They can't make a state have a law.
Yeah.
They
can't put a DEA agent on every street corner in Seattle to arrest everyone that's got a joint.
Really. It's basically this legalization is just throwing it right out of the window.
Yeah.
It's
The real question is whether Congress is going to face up to what has happened and bite the bullet and change the federal law to conform to what the American public are already doing. And remember, according to the government's own figures, well over 40% of all of the adults in the United States have used marijuana at one time or another.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of hard to run prohibition when you've got those kinds of numbers staring you in the face. And I guess the next question is, what are the other states going to do about it?
I think that with as much budget problems as we're having, especially statewide, states are probably doing a little bit worse than the federal government budget-wise. They're going to have to do everything they can to keep their budgets within line.
Well, if we look just at two very populous states, California and Massachusetts have both within the last couple of years radically decriminalized possession of marijuana by adults. And Massachusetts is one of the 4 states that's already looking at a bill this legislative session to legalize marijuana in the state. I think it's Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Maine, and
Vermont.
That first domino has fallen over now, and I don't see how any of the states can withhold very long. If we look at states like Michigan, where Detroit just passed a local ordinance saying that in the city of Detroit, possession would just be a $100 fine.
And it's legal to have 1 ounce on private property.
Okay. And, you know, I just don't really see that other states can withhold much. And right now, with the federal government in the budget crunch it's in, if they left the rest of the drug law like it is and just removed the penalties for marijuana, they could probably save about $10 billion a year in enforcement and prison costs, and by imposing a relatively small, say 10% excise tax, bring in another $10 billion in federal revenue. I mean, that's just a lot of awfully juicy money to leave laying on the table. Mm-hmm. Let's take another break, and we'll be back in a couple of minutes.
The whole idea of a drug-free America and zero tolerance really doesn't make much sense, does it? So it does make sense, however, to find ways to reduce the harms associated with drugs. And that's what I want to talk about.
Better start thinking about whether it is really laws that make the difference on whether people use drugs or not.
Al Capone didn't shoot people because he was intoxicated.
Right, exactly.
Those people are not fighting over drugs. They're fighting over money.
Drug laws have no basis in science. Drug laws are based on politics and money.
So there's this unholy symbiosis between, on the one hand, those who are selling illegal drugs, the drug lords, if you will, and on the other side, the drug warriors.
War on drugs isn't working, and that, if anything, it's just making what we call the drug problem a lot worse.
Okay, maybe a little of the money I spend on marijuana supports terror and violence.
Right.
And that's because marijuana is illegal.
Exactly.
When I buy a beer, that doesn't support terror because beer is legal, right?
Now you've got it.
So what you're saying is if we make marijuana legal and regulate it like beer, that wouldn't support violence.
Did I say that?
About 60+% of the marijuana use in this country is clearly in Anglo communities, in white communities. But if you look at the rate of arrest, you end up realizing that 10% of the people end up accounting for 35% of the rest. If you look at the prosecution, then we end up representing about 47% of those who get prosecuted. If you look at convictions, we end up being close to 60% of those who get convicted. If you look at those who end up being incarcerated, you end up being about 72%. So you go from being 10% of the population to being 72% of the people who are being incarcerated. I call it that there is a criminal industrial complex that has learned how to mine black gold.
You're watching Drugs, Crimes, and Politics on Houston Media Source.
Welcome back to Drugs, Crime, and Politics. Clay and I have been discussing the ramifications of last week's votes legalizing marijuana in Washington and Colorado. And I think we also need to look a little bit, at least, at what's been happening internationally.
Well, if we start at Mexico, we can keep going south. Mexico has already proposed 2 bills. One is for complete legalization of marijuana, and the other one is a bill to be able to sell marijuana to the United States.
Okay, now it's, I think, time for another set of numbers.
Go for it.
The 3 largest sources of foreign currency in the Mexican economy are petroleum sales, and they have been shrinking drastically. Tourism and drug smuggling. Some estimates are that the drug smuggling to the United States feeds about $30 billion a year into the Mexican economy. One Mexican think tank with a pretty good reputation estimated that legalization in Washington and Colorado would reduce the income to the Mexican cartels by at least 10%. Now, not only is that a pretty severe hit to the cartels, it may affect their ability to buy guns to shoot each other with. It may affect their ability to bribe or buy policemen or soldiers or kick back to politicians. That's enough of a hit on the economy that's probably why the bill was introduced in the Mexican legislature to legalize export of marijuana into the United States. So, frankly, there is no way the Mexican cartels can compete in an open, free market with American growers. Their product is second rate. It's expensive to transport it that far. And an illegal market has costs associated with it that are many times the cost of a legitimate local operation. So not only are the cartels faced with competition, they're faced by competition with a superior product and much, much, much lower production costs.
Well, I can say for one thing, I lived in Mexico from 95 to 99. And the product that I got when I lived down there was awful damn good.
Yeah. It can
but when you transport it 1,000 miles, it's in tires, it's in hot box cars. It's not going to get up here in good shape.
Yeah. Now, the other side to that, as far as legalization is concerned, over the last several years, Mexico has been taking many cautious steps in that direction. They have decriminalized the personal possession of personal amounts of virtually all drugs. They've reduced some penalties for small amounts of trafficking within Mexico. So I think that we're seeing that this may be a big spur for Mexico to try to handle its own problems, maybe to some extent disassociating itself from the DEA. And I say this at the same time realizing that as far as both the Mexican government and the DEA are concerned, the major problem and the one that they'll continue to work with for some time is not marijuana, it's cocaine. And that's still going to be a major problem.
That is, that's a problem everywhere right now.
Yeah.
But, you know, you're seeing all these Central American, South American countries putting in bills to go against the drug interdiction that we've been doing down there.
Yeah.
That just says that they are just so fed up with everything that this was actually something they were hoping to see.
Yeah.
And
the counter trend possibly is Brazil, who has recently tightened their laws and stepped up enforcement. But that's mainly because there has been a large increase in cocaine use within Brazil and increased trafficking from the Andean countries into Brazil, and also cocaine from the Andes through Brazil to Nigeria and on into Europe. So Brazil is kind of in a different situation. In some ways, they're kind of like Mexico was 30 years ago. But the Uruguay legalization, I think, is probably a done deal. The remaining question is whether it will be government operated through state-run farms and outlets, or whether they're going to allow for private enterprise.
They came out today and said for private enterprise.
Okay. Well, we've got about 4 minutes. You want to make a real quick prediction about what's going to happen in Texas after all of this?
Well, you know, it's hard to make a prediction in Texas. What we need to do in Texas is get back to the 1960s. Get out there and show our legislators that we mean business as a society, that we want these laws changed.
Okay. And I think, speaking as a child of the 60s myself, or a young adult of the 60s would be more appropriate, you know, legislatures pay attention when enough people take to the streets.
That's right.
But unless this is made visible to them, with lots of people talking about it, with people doing things that get the attention of the news media, the legislature is just going to hunker down in its bunker and feel like the safest thing for it to do is to just be quiet and do nothing. If people want change, they've got to force the debate into the public arena and not keep it one that the legislators do behind closed doors, putting together private and secret deals. So it's been an exciting election season. It's going to take quite a while for all of the ramifications to pay out. I'm going to go out on a limb and make 2 personal predictions about this next year. I first am going to predict that at least one other state, and I won't say which one because I don't know, but at least one other state will legalize marijuana by legislative action without having to go to another popular vote to do it. And I'm going to predict that by the next harvest season, say next October, the price of high-quality marijuana, not connoisseur stuff, not some of the specialty medical use, but high-quality, high-grade marijuana will be under $100 an ounce and possibly low as $50. Mm-hmm. So we'll see over the next year if I'm right or wrong. And in the meantime, it's been good visiting with you again tonight. Make sure your elected representatives know precisely how you feel on these issues. And we will see you again in 2 weeks with another edition of Drugs, Crime, and Politics. And for right now, Clay and I wish you a happy season and a bountiful Thanksgiving.
We have these private prisons that have now hired lobbyists to go get minimum mandatories if you...
I began to understand that the 17 or the 19-year-old kid I had in the backseat of my police car was not a criminal at all.
Remove the profit motive. If you remove the profit motive, you can do away with almost all these problems. And how do you do that? Simple. Damn prohibition, which can only mean one thing. Legalize drugs. Legalize all drugs.
If we really want to improve our urban neighborhoods, the most important thing that we could do, the single most important thing that we could do, is end the war on drugs.